before I start to glue any of this down, I need to figure out how it's going to fit on my paper. So if I were to just line this square up, you know, pretty well right in the middle of my paper, you might notice if I just take a ruler and measure how far over my peacock's going to reach, I would find that, okay, so it goes about 3.5 inches. So if I line up here and I go 3.5 inches, that's going to go off the side of my paper. So rather than lining this right up in the middle for my design, I'm going to want to bump it over some so that my design still fits. Now, the other thing I want to think a little bit about is just where I want these things to reflect. So like my whole peacock, I'm going to reflect this way. This plant here, rather than reflecting it this way, I'm actually going to take it and I'm going to reflect it down instead. So it's going to end up down here. My other elements, I'm going to take them and go this way. Okay, so I've got like a leaf and a plant over here that I'm going to bring over to this side of my paper. Now, what that leaves me with is nothing really happening along the top of this paper. So before I start gluing, I might want to think about that a little bit. I may want to add a small design element going along the top of this paper, maybe some kind of like a cloud or something that then can flip up to the top so that I don't have one flat side and then everything else happening down below it. So I think before I start doing anything else, I think I will do that. I'm just going to kind of come in and add in what could be a cloud here, or I could add another plant or something. I'm just going to do this with a line that I'll come back and cut out as well. And that reflection, I think, will add some interest to the top of my paper. So I've added that element of a top line at this point, and I'm going to start thinking about getting these things glued down. Once I know where I want this on my paper, what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up as best as I can, and I'm just going to mark where I want this to end up because that's going to help me later. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to mark the corners of my piece, of my original square on my paper. I'm trying to get it as straight as I can within this space. And I'm just marking the corners to give me an idea of where my final, once I have everything else glued down, where that final square is going to go. Okay, so I don't want to glue this square down first because I'm going to use that to help me puzzle piece the rest of this thing together. I'll glue down my small pieces first. And the way I'm going to do that, for some of these like small ones out here, you know, my plant, I can line up right against this edge right here. I can match up where it came from. I can take it, I can, you know, set it where it originally came from. Oh, if I can get a hold of it. Set it where it originally came from, and then I can just flip it down. Okay, and that's going to give me that information where this plant goes. But for all these little things up here, I could just eyeball them down here, but it's likely that I would end up getting them in the wrong place. Okay, so what I can do there is I can just take this whole square, maybe once I have that thing glued down, I can line it up with that plant that's going to be glued down, and then I can press those little pieces out and kind of hold them there. Or if I really wanted to, I could take some glue and just dot some glue onto them, and when I flip them, then they would stick down to that paper. So just sort of coming up with, you have to really do some thinking about how to contend with this and get everything lined up before you just start gluing. Otherwise, you're going to end up not getting the information that you need to get everything put down correctly. I think what I'm going to do is take just like a little toothpick and some white liquid glue instead of, I don't really want to work with a bulky glue stick. I'm just going to take a little puddle of white liquid glue and a glue stick because I can just dab a little bit of glue onto these things to help me get them at least started to glue down, and then I can add more glue to them as I'm going to finish gluing them down. And I'm just going to kind of work almost like a puzzle back and forth between flipping this wherever I need to get the information. Like when I do this leaf over here, I can flip my square to figure out where that's going to line up. You just you really don't want to you want to make sure that you're not like flipping and rotating anything. So like as I work with these little feather pieces here, I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to, and I should have left them in here. If I'd left them, it would have been much easier. This one came from this little piece. So I'm going to, when I flip this over, it's kind of sticking, which works. I can, whoop, oh, fell out. Okay, I can flip this over, and then I can just line this back up into this space, but I need to make sure that I've got it turned the right way so that it actually fits within this space. And then that's where that would end up getting glued down based on where this original square is lining up with the corners. Okay, and I'm just going to work on that back and forth until I have things glued down the way I want them. So I finished getting all of these little parts tacked down. One thing that I did do is I very lightly taped my original square to my paper. I did not press down the tape because I don't want it to adhere really. I just wanted it to hold still. Now, in thinking about it, it probably would have been smarter. Oh, I do have that one last piece. I probably should have taped it this way because then I would be able just to kind of flap it back and forth as I needed to. You know, just for a helpful little tip. So I have this last little part that I know is going to get reflected. I am using very tiny amounts of glue. That's another trick. You really don't want your glue to like squish out the sides of your shapes as you're gluing it down, just because you'll end up seeing that like kind of gloppy glue at the end. So I'm just using just enough to get it stuck down, and then I can come back and I can finish gluing this later. And I'm also trying to be, you know, as exact as possible getting these things glued. Now you'll notice I did not glue my peacock body down yet, and the reason I did not do that yet is I did some cuts here in its eyes that are going to get flipped back and forth, so I just wasn't ready to get it glued down yet. But at this point I can always come back to that. I'm going to kind of wait on this for the time being and set it off to the side. I'm going to very carefully unpeel my tape because I don't want it to mess anything up, that like tear my paper or anything. I just really lightly tape that down, and I can peel up my bigger piece. I might need just to kind of help. Some of my shapes are wanting to glue to that construction paper, so as I'm working I could use a toothpick or the tip of my X-Acto blade or a pencil or something just to help hold those shapes down that I want taped, or not taped, glued, so that the rest of my piece is able to peel up, but I'm leaving those pieces behind. Some of them are just, they're wanting to stick to, you know, I don't know that I glued that one. They're wanting to stick to my paper rather than stick to the white paper. So I'm just very carefully working on peeling this thing up. That's another thing about using just tiny bits of glue at a time. If you use too much, it's going to glue your large square down, and then you're going to be at the beginning having to kind of start over. And I'm just very carefully peeling this thing up so I don't tear anything. This is a fairly delicate piece of paper at this point because I've taken so much out of it that it would really rip really very easily. So I'm just very carefully working around my shapes to peel this paper back up and leave all of those other shapes behind. Once I know I've got what's left behind, you know, where it's supposed to be, then I can come back with a little bit of additional glue and get them, you know, any of my edges or corners or anything that are not fully glued, I can get those things glued down at this point because I don't have to worry about having as much glue and having that be a problem. Another thing that probably would have been helpful, and again, this is just a learn as you go type thing. If I had taped it on these sides here and here, every time I glued one of these shapes, I could have gently lifted this up, which would have been helpful because then it would have helped this paper not get glued down the way it was wanting to. I think I did pretty okay getting it all torn up, but that would be a really kind of easy way to, I don't know, create a problem for you in your project. All right, so at this point, I think what I'm going to do before I do anything with my peacock is I'm going to flip it the other way. I'm keeping up with all my shapes. I could go ahead and get this little guy glued down here. I think I'll do that. I'm going to take those same two little pieces of tape that I was working with just to tack my paper down, and I'm going to tape it here, almost like you could hinge it like a book open, or flap it open like a book. And I don't have very much room right there, so I think what I'll do is maybe do it here, kind of in the middle of it. The point of this is just to keep it still. And you actually, again, I'm noticing some of my white paper did glue to my black paper here, which is a little unfortunate, but there's not a whole lot I can do about that now. I think if I had been better about lifting it up, things like this probably wouldn't have happened. All right, to glue this flower down, I don't really need to flap it to figure out where it goes here because I can just match up my edge. Like if I imagine that this was a continuous line, I can just match up where this goes and I can get it glued down. But for these little shapes up here, I will need to do that flip to get those glued down. All right, I'm going to try something for these little shapes just while I have it flipped up like this. I know the glue is going to go on this side, so I'm just adding just the tiniest little bit of glue to each one. I'm really going to try to avoid getting any of my black paper glued down this time, so I'm just adding the tiniest little bit of glue to each of these because I'm hoping that when I just flap it this way, I can press those things down and then they'll want to pop out. As I'm laying this down, I'm going to lay it down carefully so that it's matching up the way that I want it to. Okay, so I've got all my little parts and pieces pretty close, and I'm just going to press those little shapes down. I've got this one additional one here that fell out that I will add a little bit of glue to, making sure I know which side the glue needs to be added to. I'm pretty sure it's, these little shapes are tough to figure out the side, but I'm adding a little bit of glue to this shape right here, just the tiniest little bit. I'm going to press it into its space, and then I'm hoping that I might need a little help with my X-Acto blade that I can peel. Okay, peel this up, pressing those shapes out. Ooh, this one's not wanting to stick. Okay. One issue is I didn't cut all the way through on some of these, so they're really wanting to shift as I lift them up. So that didn't really work super well. I'm gonna have to kind of move these things around a little bit. And if it's not perfectly exact on where they're supposed to be, if it's pretty close, that's okay. You just don't want them to be like way off. So I can do a little bit of eyeballing here to get these things where they're supposed to be. Okay. And then this one right here didn't glue at all. So let's see, I think I'll pop it out. Probably would have been a good thing to do first. And it's gonna end up getting glued right here. And then I'll shift and go onto this side and then my last side there. Then I'll come back and fill in my peacock. All right, I'm going to try something for these little shapes just while I have it flipped up like this. I know the glue is going to go on this side, so I'm just adding just the tiniest little bit of glue to each one. I'm really going to try to avoid getting any of my black paper glued down this time, so I'm just adding the tiniest little bit of glue to each of these because I'm hoping that when I just flap it this way, I can press those things down and then they'll want to pop out. As I'm laying this down, I'm going to lay it down carefully so that it's matching up the way that I want it to. Okay, so I've got all my little parts and pieces pretty close, and I'm just going to press those little shapes down. I've got this one additional one here that fell out that I will add a little bit of glue to, making sure I know which side the glue needs to be added to. I'm pretty sure it's, these little shapes are tough to figure out the side, but I'm adding a little bit of glue to this shape right here, just the tiniest little bit. I'm going to press it into its space, and then I'm hoping that I might need a little help with my X-Acto blade that I can peel. Okay, peel this up, pressing those shapes out. Ooh, this one's not wanting to stick. Okay. One issue is I didn't cut all the way through on some of these, so they're really wanting to shift as I lift them up. So that didn't really work super well. I'm gonna have to kind of move these things around a little bit. And if it's not perfectly exact on where they're supposed to be, if it's pretty close, that's okay. You just don't want them to be like way off. So I can do a little bit of eyeballing here to get these things where they're supposed to be. Okay. And then this one right here didn't glue at all. So let's see, I think I'll pop it out. Probably would have been a good thing to do first. And it's gonna end up getting glued right here. And then I'll shift and go onto this side and then my last side there. Then I'll come back and fill in my peacock. I've got most everything glued down at this point. I have a couple little pieces, but I think everything else that I have to glue down, I can do without needing to be able to flip the square. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and place my main largest piece that I have as best as I can. I still don't want to just put a bunch of white liquid glue onto the back of it, so I'm going to continue working with white liquid glue, but not squeezing from the bottle. I'm just going to add little lines of glue using the same method that I've been using, because I really just don't want to get any glue squished out places where I don't want it. And so I'm just adding kind of some little dots of glue all around. And then the biggest key as I get this thing glued down is going to be making sure that it's lined up with the left side and the right side as much as possible. Okay, so I've got just these little bits of glue all around, and I'll be able to come back and add more glue to my edges easily. It won't be super easy for me to add glue in any of my middle areas, so I'm going to make sure I've got enough dots of glue that those things are going to stick down. Okay, and I'm going to take my whole square and very carefully match it up with those marks that I made for my 4 corners. So I'll just start here, and I'll be able to adjust kind of as I go. So I'm just not wanting to lay the whole thing down yet. I want to just kind of work my way up and make sure I'm matching with those corners so that everything else is going to end up lining up the way I want it to. And then once I have it placed, I can press the whole thing down. I can come back with a little bit more glue on any of these places that are still not really wanting to stick down all the way. And another thing you could do, which I might do with mine, I think I might go back and add a layer of Mod Podge onto the whole thing as just kind of a varnish in the end, and that'll help seal everything down and put kind of a shine to my piece. Now if you don't like that, like if you don't want it to have a shine, you of course don't have to do that, but what it'll do is just finish gluing down any of these corners that didn't quite get stuck. All right, so my last pieces that I have are my peacock and then my kind of cloud shape up top. So I'm gonna just start with the cloud shape, line it up. I'll add glue this side and flip it and get it glued, okay? And then I can take this side, line it up, add my glue, and it'll flip down here. And I'll do the same thing with my peacock, where I'm gonna figure out where it needs to go, pop out its little eye shape first so that I can get it glued down, because it'll kind of work back and forth. I've got actually 2 shapes there. So I'll get this glued down where I want it to go, and then I'll work on that eye shape as well, and I'll have the layout of my piece finished. Okay, so here's my finished piece. You might notice over here my leaf runs off the side of the paper, so I could just trim that off if I wanted to. I could leave it either way. And I realized as I was finishing gluing my peacock down, I forgot to make him or her a beak. I think it's probably too dry to do that now, so I'm just gonna leave it. But I've got all 4 sides of my original square engaged. Everywhere where there's negative space inside of this, there's a positive space outside of it. So the entire piece is balanced. There's nothing missing. There's a couple things that are shifted, like this right here is, this gapping is a little bit bigger, but it's pretty close as far as it being fully balanced. And my last step would be, of course, as an artist, to take a pen and sign my work. So I'm just going to do that down here in I could, actually maybe I'll sign up here a little closer to it. You can sign your name, initials, however you want to sign your work. You don't want to like insert it in the middle of your design. You want your signature to be a part of your design that marks your work as your own, but doesn't detract from the work either. So I don't really want it down here. I think I'm just going to come in right here and add my signature onto my piece. And there's my complete Notan work.